Well, there are three certainties in life: death, taxes, and Northeast Wealth providing a high-quality federal budget wrap-up. My name is James O'Reilly, and I'm going to take you through that today. Now, of course, general advice disclaimer, and a very important reminder that, of course, a lot of these proposals are just that, proposals. They've not yet gone through Parliament, they are not law yet, and there is work to be done. Notwithstanding that some of these actually have gone through Parliament and they are going to be live. In those cases, I've done my best to point that out. Let's get started. Firstly, we're going to talk about individuals because the centerpiece of this budget, the big surprise, was a tax cut, which really came out of nowhere. Now, the way that this tax cut has been proposed is that for Australians that earn above $18,200, which is a lot of us, for everyone that does that, you're very likely to be paying some tax in the 16% tax bracket or 16 plus Medicare levy, depending on your income. The proposal is that it will reduce from 16% down to 15% in FY26 and then down to 14% in FY27. Now, in real terms, it's expected that that benefit is going to be, as it says here, around about $500 per annum for individuals that are earning above $45,000 per annum, and $268 in year one, $536 when it is instituted. One of the real things to be aware of here is that this is a permanent change. Of course, it's not a temporary proposal. So this would mean that Australians are better off over the long term by $536 per annum indefinitely in the absence of more new tax legislation. And the reason I emphasize that is because the coalition has said that they're absolutely not going to support this. To date, we haven't heard the coalition's full budget proposal, but what we have heard is that Peter Dutton has proposed a fuel excise reduction, which is worth about $6 billion versus the Labor government's $17 billion splash just with this particular proposal. However, that fuel excise is only a 12-month benefit, whereas Labor's would be indefinite. We move across next to the Medicare levy threshold. There's a very marginal increase in that threshold. As a reminder, if your income as an individual is above 26K, then you would also pay 2% on top of all tax rates because of Medicare levy. And similarly, if you're a family, then it goes to 43.8K, 43,800, I should say. And so, of course, you can see these are marginal increases, only a few percent. I think it's about 5% increase. It's not really going to make a huge change, but nevertheless, it is a change for some Australians. There is a childcare test, which is, forgive me, I'm going the wrong order. Energy rebate. This is a simple one. They've extended it for households for another 6 months, so we'll benefit from another $75 per quarter off our electricity bills. And then lastly, some childcare changes that are pretty meaningful. So previously, for families that were eligible for childcare, which meant that the household income was below $533,000, there was an activity test, which essentially meant that parents had to either be working or studying or looking for work for at least 16 hours every fortnight to access those subsidies. But that activity test is getting removed. So even if conceivably you had one parent who was stay at home for whatever reason, in that world, their children are still eligible to not only go to childcare, of course, but also get the subsidy. If we move across to Social Security, this for mine is a big negative. An internal review conducted by Labor found that payments like JobSeeker, were seriously inadequate. They're below the poverty line in terms of the amount that we're paying Australians, and there's again been no changes to that. There's a lot of views about this, but my firm view is that this system is unfair. We need to do a better task of ensuring that people who are on Social Security benefits have sufficient income, and it's disappointing to see another year go by without this being addressed. And lastly, student debt. This is a big one, which is the proposal is to reduce student debt by 20% lump sum on whatever outstanding student debt that is. Now, the Labor government's maths is that that's going to save the average student debt holder around about $5,500, and if I recall correctly, I think the total cost of that is proposed to be about $740 million, somewhere in that sort of zone. So of course, there already have been some benefits for students as they've adjusted those CPI numbers retrospectively so that student loans weren't going up by 9% and other disgusting numbers. And this, I think, is trying to negate some of that. It was marked down as a cost of living measure, but I've no idea why it would be marked that way because practically it doesn't really have any bearing on cost of living. Let's get on with it. Some other majors to talk about here. Housing affordability. So there is a Help to Buy scheme which has been expanded. As a reminder, that Help to Buy scheme enables Australians who would like to purchase a home but do not have the deposits to be able to use government support in order to make that purchase. So you can have as little as a 2% deposit, and then the government will have essentially contribute up to 40% of the home value, and that would enable you to have a lower home loan and potentially meet serviceability requirements that you wouldn't have otherwise been able to achieve. Now, for single people you can earn up to $100,000. For couples, you can earn up to $160,000 and be eligible for this scheme. And the price caps are changing for all of the cities to reflect the fact that property prices are changing. So the price cap in Sydney, you wouldn't be able to purchase a home worth more than 1.3 mil. For most other capital cities, it hovers around or just below 1 million, with the exception of Perth and Hobart, which are, Hobart and Darwin, which are a little bit lower again. This measure, incidentally, matches a promise made by the Coalition to relieve some pressure on the housing market. Now, importantly, this is a good scheme, but for a long time I've been saying I don't think it's all that it is all that it's cracked up to be. And I say that because, in a practical sense, if you have an income below $160,000, your serviceability, your ability to get a loan from a bank, even for the remaining 60% of a $1.3 million home in Sydney, is impossible. So in real terms, this may have been a better proposal back in the golden eras of interest rates of being 2% and everyone just passing serviceability everywhere. But in today's day and age, I feel as though there could be some better adjustments to this scheme. Nevertheless, it is being expanded, and hopefully that's an improvement for a lot of Australians. The second meaningful change here is that from next month, foreign home buyers will be banned from buying existing homes in Australia for at least 2 years. This, of course, the intention here is to ensure that there is less demand on domestic property from overseas interests, and the advantage to that, or the perceived advantage, is that with less demand overseas, then we shouldn't have, and obviously if supply is relatively constrained at the moment, so if demand is lower, well then so we should be paying a little bit less for all of our property purchases, especially younger Australians who are looking to get into the housing market for the first time. If we move across to, I'll do environment next if I may. We've got $250 million allocated toward Labor's target of ensuring 30% of Australia's landmass is a protected conservation area. They set that target a while back, and as a reminder, the idea was 30% by 2030. I believe we're now at around 22% of Australia's landmass being a protected conservation area. And so, of course, there's some capital here in order to continue moving that forward. There has also been $21 billion allocated to the Clean Energy Finance Corporation to invest in renewable energy and low emissions technology. Now, I know this is what we call off-budget spending. In the budget, it's repeating this promise, but this promise was actually made previous, and so in reality, it's not really a huge surprise. Disappointingly, there's still no meaningful advancements in our commitment toward net zero by 2050. Of course, in the Paris Agreement, Australia and so many other countries have committed to the idea of getting ourselves to a point where we're net zero. And at face value, it really feels like Australia's doing very little of the heavy lifting here, which is disappointing considering we are one of the huge polluters. Nevertheless, that in terms of environment overall, I guess they're the wins and the losses. The big one that stood out to me that needed a lot more attention and didn't was the NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Now, for mine, this is really starting to look like that enormous, fully loaded train that is, that might very well be off the rails. And if we think about how the NDIS started, the initial intent was just to ensure that it would be there to support people who had long-term serious disabilities. That was the initial premise of the NDIS, and it has expanded and expanded and expanded and expanded. Well, it's expanded to a point now where the money allocated to the NDIS next financial year, $52 billion, is going to exceed defence spending. That's remarkable, and it's more concerning when you consider that we are not keeping the growth of NDIS in check. The government set a real cap, this hard cap of 8%. NDIS shouldn't increase by more than 8% next year. Absolutely not. And it did. It increased by 10. And that might seem like a small difference, 8 and 10%, but again, we're talking about $50 billion. So you really, really, really want to have projects in check when they have that level of expense to the national account. I'm a little torn here because I have some people I really care about that benefit from NDIS, and so the challenge here is that if you want to make it more financially sustainable, you've got to tighten the clamps on eligibility and also the benefits that can be received if you're on NDIS, and that's naturally a conflict for me personally and for so many Australians, because so many of us know and have loved ones who have really benefited from this scheme. But having said that, at the size that it is, we have to get the clamps on this at some point, because this really is starting to run off the rails. And especially in context of where we are in a broader economic setting, I don't think we can afford to have concerns about its financial sustainability. If we look to the economics of this budget, this is a real fail in a broad sense. I mean, we have $122 billion of losses over the budget's rolling 4-year period with Labor in government. And frankly, we're really lucky for it to have been this small. We've had really high export prices over that time for coal, iron ore, gas, and that has resulted in a huge tax windfall, which practically should have resulted in periods of surplus, not deficit. Now, what's more, these deficits and also the future deficits that are indicated or forecasted are demonstrating that we're probably looking at hitting $1 trillion of government debt next financial year, which is not only terrifying, but it becomes even scarier in the context of where we are financially. When you have big government debt, eventually it comes back to the people in one way or another, in the form of higher taxes or poor infrastructure and less spending. And this feels like a period we should have made a lot more financial progress. And the fact that we're still in this state where there is no real clear way forward, that to me is deeply concerning. Indeed, the US is facing a possible recession, and that's resulted in much of the world anticipating slower global economic growth. And there's none of those assumptions. There's no slowdown of economic growth in any of our forecasting. It just assumes business as usual, which again is a worry. And lastly, as it says down here, this concept of embedded forecasts, for mine, they really lack credibility. There is an assumption, as it says here, that the government real spending reduces from 6% down to 3%, down to 0.5% in the preceding financial years. But it begs the question, if we can simply reduce it from 6 to 3 to 0.5, how are we here? How are we still at 6? Why is it that we think that you deserve credibility to reduce government spending down to 0.5% growth versus where you are right now in your track record over this term? And of course, this isn't just a Labor problem. This getting to $1 trillion in debt has been a two-party problem, a real two-party problem. So in summary, of course, there are some wins for individuals here. It is a tough budget to balance in the sense that we do have a cost of living crisis. We can't throw fuel on the fire because that's going to create potentially inflationary impacts that are going to delay the Reserve Bank from lowering interest rates. And that really is the most meaningful way that most Australians are going to see an improvement to their bottom line. But I'm deeply concerned that there's still no framework to seeing ourselves balance the budget over the next decade. I think that the pre-election tax cuts at $17 billion are really poorly thought out in terms of our economic situation, and noting, of course, that they're actually going to get pushed through before the election, which will come in the not distant future, of course. And when that means practically that the Liberal government, if they are elected, the coalition, they will need to repeal that legislation rather than simply not letting it through. Thank you, everyone. I hope that summary makes perfect sense. It's not necessarily the rosy summary that we all hoped for, but having said that, it's all I've got for you. If you've got any questions about the budget and how this impacts your own finances, your own financial situation, then please don't get in touch. Our advisors would love to hear from you, and we will eagerly await the coalition's response, which should come sometime in the next 24 hours. Have a great day, everyone.